dad, and I was having all this fear about the women I'd meet, and me having to say I was divorced, and what do they think of when they hear about a divorced dad.
I was petrified, like, to be a single mom and like get labeled the single mom when you sort of feel like you're labeled as like damaged goods. It took a long time to get over that for me, and realize that it's not really that big of a deal.
I never thought I would date someone who had a child.
I didn't want to just be a step-parent, I wanted to be a co-parent. I wanted to be a part of Asher's life. I wanted to shower him with love and show him things that were important to me, priorities to me, things that made me the man that I am today. And I wanted to share that with him, and I wanted Ben's blessing to be able to do that.
And I kind of was like wondering if a stepmom would be different from a stepdad and stuff like that. And I wanted brothers and sisters too. Kind of regret it now, but no, I'm just kidding.
People make it about themselves. It's not. It's about your kids.
I think the biggest thing about this book is putting aside your ego is a huge. If there was one thing that all of us had to do every step of the way, it was putting aside our ego and also being really considerate.
I just had to change my behaviors. I just had to change, who I was and who I wanted to be, and, what kind of father I wanted to be, what kind of man I wanted to be.
A happy divorce is absolutely possible. Again, you just have to be committed and willing to take the necessary steps to have it. And I'll tell you, if you're willing to do it, your children will be better because of it, and your life will be better because of it.
There's a lot of people with their families, they just say that, oh, this isn't possible, my family can't do this. But just know that it's always possible, and you could always have a happy divorce.
Well, hello, and welcome to Co-Parenting during COVID with Our Happy Divorce and our special guest, Aaron from Hello Divorce. My name is Ben Helfond.
Really?
Yes, and I am the ex-husband. And who are you?
I'm the ex-wife, Nikki DeBartolo.
And we're the co-authors, like I said, of Our Happy Divorce, a book about how ending our marriage brought us closer together. And the question is, why are we doing this? And it's because the past few...
Ben makes me.
Yeah. It's because I make her do everything, even after divorce. But we've been getting a lot of questions about what to do if the ex does this or doesn't do this during this pandemic. A lot of them were legal questions that we just couldn't answer. We're not lawyers. We didn't go to law school, and we didn't stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night. And
we would never go to law school.
We would never go to law school. Too much school.
I could not go to law school.
And there, look, there's questions all over the place in life, but in family court, family law is no different. So we wanted to create a place where people could come together and ask questions and just, get in a mood of or an attitude of solution. And so we looked high and long and far for somebody who shared our views and our values as
we
far
don't
as
look very far, because isn't she from the Bay Area?
She is from the Bay Area. So Nikki is going to introduce Aaron Levine.
Always makes me do things.
Come on.
Welcome, Aaron. She spent 15 years advising clients, litigating, negotiating, and mediating contested and cooperative divorces, and running a respected boutique law firm in the Bay Area. And while she received all the certifications, accolades, and awards that any family lawyer would strive for, Aaron became disillusioned with the system that routes every divorce through court, pitting spouses against one another, not being one to shy away from challenges, and being comfortable as the underdog. She set out to create an online, ethically compliant divorce. Hello Divorce has become the convenient, efficient divorce option for ex-couples who want to transition out of a relationship without all the expense and drama ordinarily No drama here associated with divorce. Welcome, Erin.
Hi, guys.
Hi, Erin.
See, I wore my colors, wore your colors, I should say. Tried to coordinate here.
I love it.
You did a great job at it. Thank you for joining us. When we I had our first conversation months ago, I think it's fair to say we hit it off and we agreed to work with it. And
did you get a word in edgewise with him though, Erin?
Troy, our friend
We
Troy
were
says hi.
finishing each
Erin.
other's sentences, definitely.
Okay.
Yeah,
all right.
we were, and so. A lot like you've been over our conversation the past couple of days, it's sort of the Wild West out there. As far as divorce and it creates uncertainty by nature, but even now more so than ever. So what are some of the things that you're actually? Before I say that, I just want to let people know that we're going to be taking questions, and if you have a question, you can just type it right there in the box and. Allegedly, I think that's a lawyer word, we will get it and answer it. Erin will answer it, and Nick and I can put in our 2 cents. But if you don't feel comfortable and want to keep your anonymity, feel free to text 813-467
461
5588. Again, 813-461-5588. That number is right there on your screen. So some of the questions that you've been getting around this issue, and then solution. We really want this also to be a solution-oriented live stream. So
Yeah, absolutely. I'm all about solutions, and there's just a couple things I want to say first. One is that the obligatory disclaimer, this is not legal advice. I'm going to share with you legal information. I'm going to tell you everything it is that I know. But ultimately, if you need legal advice, if you want to talk to a lawyer about your specific situation, then I want you to do that, because we can talk till we're blue in the face about our perspective. But ultimately, it's simply our perspective, and it's not the law as it pertains to your case. So there's my obligatory lawyerly disclaimer.
Right.
So it's been really, really interesting for us. On a normal day, we would see maybe 5, 10, 15 good leads either coming to our law firm, Levine Family Law Group, or to our online divorce platform, Hello Divorce. And in the past 3 weeks, we've had over 2,500 people come, and most of them have direct questions, lots of them in regards to where they are in the divorce, whether they should continue. But the vast majority of them have been around co-parenting, and it's been everything from, do the shelter-in-place orders have an exception that allow me to do a co-parenting exchange? What if I don't want to? What if I don't feel like my ex is taking the necessary precautions for our health? Do I still have to do the exchange? And for much of the last month, we've received very little to no guidance from the court. As you said, it's been like this Wild West in that the court's closed and offered us virtually nothing. And so up until the last few days, when we've been starting to see some guidance, it's really been about family law attorneys coming together and trying to interpret the law and the predicament in the best way we knew how, and coming to a consensus. Mm-hmm. So it's been quite interesting.
Yeah. I also think it's important, and again, I'm not the lawyer here, but one thing that I've heard, and I think you and I talked about it today, is that no matter what happens, or no matter what your thought process is, that it's not okay to break your custody agreement just because you think so. Right? I mean, I think in general, it's like people think it's okay to hold back their rent from a landlord because their water doesn't fix, or they have a water leak. But it's still law, right? I mean, so just yes. You have a question, Nikki?
I have a question, but what if I wasn't taking this as serious as you were?
Well, that's a good question. So, Aaron.
What if I decided that I thought it was
A hoax.
A hoax, like
Right.
some of the population still believes, with
Right.
people dying.
And you're
every
just
day?
out there, like, hanging out at the bars
Right.
on your own and with your friends outside.
Right.
Right.
So, how's that situation handled?
I think we have to back up a bit. And I mean, the first piece is like we have to think about our kids. Before we even look to court orders or previous agreements, we have to look to the best interest of our kids, not just their physical wellness, but their emotional wellness as well. And one thing we do know, and you guys know this so well because your children are faring so well post-divorce, is that we have to shield them from conflict. And if we don't, that's where kids are less resilient. That's where they really start to struggle. And so, yes, court orders are very, very important. And if you and your ex don't communicate well, then that's certainly the first place that you should start. Mm-hmm. And what the courts have told us is that for the most part, these exchanges should take place, especially if they're local in proximity. So I had one person, for example, say to me, look, I'm way more equipped to do homeschool with the kids. I was always the primary parent while we were married. I enjoy this stuff. The kids should stay with me. Is that okay? And my answer was, well, unless your ex agrees, absolutely not. This co-parenting exchange must continue because that is, in fact, what the order is, what the law is, and quite frankly, what's probably best for your kids to have that normalcy, at least have that stability of being able to see and enjoy both parents.
Right. And the, one thing as far as a goal of the book, but also of this live stream, is that we want to emphasize the word co. And it's, husband number 2 just walked in the studio. As we want to emphasize the word co. It's in co-parent, cooperate, compromise, collaborative, and COVID. And I think there's a lot of universal themes between the two, and that the way we're going to get out of this thing, this pandemic, and also on a road to a happy divorce or a better outcome is together. Nikki and I couldn't have the relationship we have now if we didn't do it together, both of us. And I think that, in all these conflict resolutions that are coming up now, have come up in the past and will come up in the future, is that it's together.
And the funny thing, you brought up schooling. Mm-hmm. For the two of us, we kept our schedule, but Asher, our son, still comes over in the morning to our house to do school. Which, I mean, no matter if he's at Ben's house and that's Ben's time, he comes to our house to do schoolwork because there's 2 younger children there that sometimes they can't get enough of Asher. So it's quieter.
Right.
It's quieter at our house.
It's quieter. And instead of me going, oh, well, that's my time with my son, I'm going to sacrifice, I'm not going to give up my time for my son. That just doesn't work. That's not a together, collaborative, what's best for our son. I think I like to keep it simple. And I think sometimes I have to answer the question of what's 2 + 2. When it equals 4 for Asher, that's the right decision. But when it equals 4 for us, but not Asher, that's the wrong decision. And some of the answers for Asher are 4, but it might seem to us like they're 1,000. So if the 2 + 2 = 4 for the kid, you're doing okay and you're doing right.
He still does math better than me.
Well, I think that's pretty simple math. That's why.
And I think that in ordinary times, like co-parenting for a lot of people isn't particularly that stressful. I mean, parenting in general is hard. There are a lot of clients that we have that co-parent quite well. And I think a lot of it has to do with how you go about doing your divorce, right? Not always, but to the extent that you can be respectful and in integrity during your divorce, the co-parenting relationship generally follows. But the one thing that I want to remind people is, despite the stress and the anxiety that puts on you, and it puts anxiety on all of us. And when we're anxious, we do things sometimes that, are not particularly rational or kind. I want to remind everyone that this is not you against your ex.
Right.
We are a team, and we are going up against the problem. And the problem could be coronavirus, or the legal system, or not having enough toilet paper, or whatever it might be. But that's the problem. Right. And I really hope that people, for the most part, are able to focus on that. Not to say that there aren't people that are just awful to co-parent with.
Right.
I know that. But there are things that we can do even then to make things easier and better on our kids and less stressful for us.
I have a lovely friend that I saw just joined on, and she's having a hell of a time with her divorce right now. A good shout out to my friend Amelia.
Hi, Amelia.
Love you.
So we have a question, and I don't think you can see him, so I'm going to put it on the screen here, and Nikki can read it to you.
What am I reading? What should co-parents do when disputing who should get the stimulus check?
That's a really good question. Because 95% of the questions that I've been getting regarding custody or regarding co-parenting has been about custody, not about money. And when it comes to custody, if the two of you can't work it out yourself, there's all sorts of resources that I can bring in, like co-parenting counselors or parenting coordinators, but they don't deal with money. So when it comes to the money issue, well, first of all, I don't know that we're necessarily going to have a choice. I don't know the rules with respect to how this money is divided. I do know that if you are in arrears in child support, that you can expect not to receive a check.
Right.
Do you guys know what's going to happen in terms of like the custodial, like if you're sharing joint custody, who will get those checks?
Well, I think it's per. It's interesting. So I think the person who claims it would. I don't know for sure. I'm just using at least some common sense or relative common sense. But whoever claims as a dependent, the child as a dependent.
Yeah, purposes of taxes. That's probably where it's
purposes of taxes. Now, one of the stories that I heard, which was so great, is sometimes
Samantha says it follows the taxes.
It follows the taxes. All right, so there we go. Samantha.
Thank you, Samantha.
Thank you, Samantha. She says it follows the taxes. So this is what we want. We want interactive. We don't claim to know anything or everything. But there was a question that I sometimes I host a lawyer show or co-host. I don't host it, and the question the guy called in was worried about the stimulus check because he was behind on spousal support, and the lawyer, who's great, went into lawyer talk, but he didn't know the answer, and he said, "I'll get back to you next week." And I told the guy, I said, "Why don't you just have a conversation with your ex and just be open and honest with her and see what happens?" And he called back the following week and said, "You know what? I had a conversation with her, and she said, I understand what you're going through, and keep the stimulus. We'll work it out later."
Samantha said hers was written into her divorce on Friday, so it's 50-50.
So, that's interesting.
Yeah.
They must have had a settlement because most judges are not, unless you have a private judge, are not making decisions on things that are not emergencies. So, but that's good to hear.
That is awesome.
We also just want to throw up in the meantime that we do have texts available. So if you want to text us and don't want to ask a question out in the open, the text number is on your screen right now. And
my husband looks scared by that question right now.
And we'll answer it anonymously. So as the drinks get through Nikki, she will become louder and louder.
I'm not.
And a little bit more annoying. So you will see through the night, however long this lasts, why we are no longer married. So
why did I not get a drink? Why? But the problem is if I open the door to get one, my kids will come running in and then we'll never be able to get them back in the other room.
Right. Well, we do have, I did put on here a little break button. So if you have to go to the bathroom, I did want to say that my wife, Nadia, is watching, and she somewhere here, I'm trying to find, said something.
Nadia, do you have a question for us?
No, she said something very kind to
She did.
Aaron about preaching. There we go. I'm going to add it here. It says, "Preach, Aaron. Limiting exposure." Limiting exposure to conflict and adult drama, I think is a good way of going about it.
Yeah, I mean, and just remember, like, the communication issues that you had during your marriage, they don't magically go away when you break up a divorce. And this is not just marital couples, but people who have kids. And so if you've been communicating and it hasn't been working, we need to try something different. And criticizing and demands are going to get you absolutely nowhere, especially if you're dealing with a man. like having that type of communication, like, what are you doing to keep the kids safe? And who's been coming to your house? That kind of communication just makes people freeze up, and they're not going to share with you the information that you want. So, yeah. What have you guys done? I know you don't have that much in terms of conflict anymore, but at some point you did. And how do you communicate when one of you is feeling angry or anxious?
Muted. Okay, now we're back on. I had pushed the mute button. But I think that one thing.
They missed the fact that I said that I usually scream and you hang up on me.
Right, which is true. And then I know that she'll come back, and I've learned through the years that her bark is a lot worse than her bite, and it's a lot easier to accept her for all of her as her ex-husband and not her husband. But in all seriousness, like, there's a point where we reached that it didn't become about us anymore. And in the beginning, it was about Asher, and it was about our son, and his well-being and his happiness had to come above ours. And that the thing I said earlier about 2 + 2 = 4 for him, and not necessarily for us. And it was a process. I mean, it was something that I think people need to understand, that we didn't get here sitting next to each other in a social distancing, because we are one family basically, and have been able to quarantine together. But it took time. It didn't happen overnight. And if you're new and you're just getting divorced, or you don't see any possible way of having this relationship, I promise you that Nikki and I didn't have that thought either when we first got divorced. We didn't think that it was going to be a great, happy divorce, that we'd be sitting on a live stream.
We wanted to tolerate each other.
Right. We wanted to tolerate and try to limit the exposure for our son, to our choices and our decisions. Mm-hmm. And then over time, it just sort of evolved, and it was, much better. So when a pandemic came, or any other emergency came in our lives, nothing changed. I mean, everything's changed, but nothing's changed as far as our life and what we share together. We communicated in the beginning about how each one of us was going to treat our households, right? So, that means no babysitters, no housekeeper, nobody else in the house, no people coming to fix the house. And so once we made that decision, all of a sudden our sphere of quarantine expanded, because, Asher was going to go back and forth, and we wanted to make sure, first of all, he was protected, but also that he wasn't going to be an infection or, carrying the disease
the little carrier monkey.
The outbreak monkey to each other's houses. Yeah. So once we, and I knew that Nikki, when she said she was going to do that, that she was going to do it. She knew that when I did it, and it's turned out to be great, because like I said, we have extended the sphere of self-quarantine, so we get to hang out together. We get to sit next to each other. I get to hang out with Chad. Nadia gets to hang out with Nikki. And so it started off with one thing and it's evolved into this other.
You should broadcast that, Chad Smitty.
All
That's
right.
a nice comment.
Go ahead, Nick. Read it.
The legal union
Whoa,
that
that's
is
big.
broken has zero comparison to the internal union that is available to two people who love their children more than they do themselves mutually. It is so possible to live a wonderful life together, though apart. Amen to that.
I don't know why that got so big, but
I don't exactly know what Ben's doing. Technical difficulties. Yeah. So, Aaron, what are we had talked before, and I know that you had you've been getting bombarded. If I could just go through some questions here. What? You can take that off.
No, I know, but I
Right there, that X.
it should go off. All right, there we go.
I know. I'm trying to fix my settings here too because everyone's like super small on my screen.
Oh.
That happened.
Well, this is the beauty of live streaming.
This is why I don't do any part of this.
This is why
Just show up.
this is why the vloggers and the live streamers who get the chance to edit are a lot better off. But so for example, my ex lives out of state and still wants to exchange our kids. Help.
Yeah.
What
That's not
advice?
a question for me. That's a question for Aaron.
So that's a really tough question. I think at this point, if the mode of transportation has generally been for travel to and from visitation has been airplane, then it's reasonable, I would think, at this point, not to travel by airplane. Travel's down something like 95%, and there is definitely known risks for being in close contact with other people and traveling. Now, that being said, I think it's, again, a decision that you make together. If your ex is not going to have your child because they live outside of the state, then we need to figure out a way, especially if that child's quite young, for him or her to still have an incredible amount of contact, unlimited amount of contact with the other parent, with text or phone or video chat, or if it's a young child, Facebook portals can be a really great way to stay connected to that parent. But it has to happen. And we need to think about makeup time or another solution so that the child's going to have plenty of time with the other parent. One thing we do know is that a lot of states and counties aren't specifically going into nuances like how far the parents need to live apart before the exchange gets suspended. But what they are saying is that everybody's got to be reasonable and everybody's got to act in good faith. And if you're not, that could be a reason to modify custody when all of this is said and done and the courts reopen. So I think if you are in a situation where you are just not able to use this as an opportunity to come together and co-parent, then you really need to be on your best behavior and you need to be recording communications. Not voice communications, but you need to be writing down your position and sharing it with your ex and showing how, if visitation is suspended, what it is that you'll do to try to work together so that your child has more time with him or her.
Yeah, and that's, I'm glad you brought that up because, that's sort of the advice, non-legal advice I would give or have given to people around this is if there's a compromise and a solution to everything, right? And so and this is, although extreme, I don't think any different. I mean, if there's been some months where I've been traveling, let's just say more than 15 days out of the month, I know that Nikki will make it up later on the following month, or vice versa. So this could be, if you extend the lens to this virus, is there's some real concerns, and I'll take everybody at their word and just use the real ones of one spouse working in the healthcare field, and on the front lines. And so, that's a real concern. I mean, that is a valid concern that the child, I mean, and the other parent, this is one that I heard, the other parent was had her parents and her new husband's parents living with them. So, having that kid, potentially go back and forth with being a carrier wasn't good for anybody. So the advice, that I would give, and I don't know, from the legal perspective, is, find a way to
make up the time.
But no, make the time.
But you don't have to make it up all at once.
Right, or let's come over, let's take a walk outside and properly social distance and, see your son or daughter or kids. And yes, it's probably not the best idea to stay with them, but there's a solution. There's a middle ground somewhere. I don't know, what you would say under that circumstance.
Well, I definitely agree. And I think that some of these solutions that you're posing right now, people just haven't thought of. And it's not because they're not smart. It's because not everyone thrives in crisis. Not everyone does okay when they're feeling stressed or threatened. And so I think it is important, both the responsibility of lawyers and, of you guys tangential to the profession, to remind people that let's be solution oriented. Let's think about how we can do this in a way that most benefits us and more importantly, our child.
Right.
And if your intentions are not to do what's best for your child, but rather to gain some sort of control or alienate your child from the other parent, then, first, it will backfire.
Right.
It will
and
backfire.
Now's not the time.
Right.
Well,
now is definitely not the time.
It'll backfire on you. And more importantly, it'll backfire on the kids, right? And that's what we try to, at least our message is that it has to be about the kids, and using them and weaponizing them, is just not a solution that is good for anybody and will have lasting effects, far beyond this pandemic.
They would like the private number.
Yeah, I just wanted to put this number back up. If you have a
Chad said you can pin it.
Yeah, I don't know how to do that. If you have a private, if you have an anonymous question that you want to ask that you don't want to ask in a forum, feel free to text 813-461-5588, and we will get it answered anonymously from Aaron. So feel free to do that.
It's like a bat phone. I don't even know that number.
That's my private number. No, it's my Google number that I signed up for today. The other questions that I'm just trying to go through here. We sort of talked on this earlier, but this is an opportunity. I think, at least I try to see it as an opportunity to make a relationship with an ex better. I think you and I talked about the Wall Street Journal article that was written by a contributor there that said that she's never gotten along better with her ex than she did during this time.
Yeah.
So, what kind of opportunities do you see through this as an opportunity to get, to find that this thing works?
Right. And to bond together around this experience that you're both going through. One of our followers said something like, "This is the craziest divorce ever." And when you think about it, if you are getting divorced or you are experiencing a co-parenting issue during the time of a global pandemic, yes, it's completely unprecedented and it is pretty crazy. Mm-hmm. And to the extent that you can find humor in it, well, that's going to go a long way. And I think that, part of the problem is that whether it be society or the legal system, we receive these messages that we're not supposed to get along, that we're supposed to be at war, and that our families and our friends and the people in our support network should have our back. And the way that they should do that is to hate our ex or to villainize our
We're
ex.
programmed that way.
Right.
We're programmed that
some
way.
reason. Even,
And-
I mean, our families thought we were crazy.
Yeah, no,
Our
and
friends thought we were crazy.
and to a certain extent, like you are. And
We are
here's what I
crazy.
mean by that. Here's what I mean by that. I mean that you have taken a really strong, meaningful position, come out to the world and said, hey, we're not going to stand for that. Like, we're going to do it a new way, a better way. And that's kind of crazy, right? There
Right.
wasn't anything like that before. I have a couple clients, and we've written lots of blogs about them on hellodivorce.com, who have a very similar situation in that they both moved out of state. Both of the families moved out of state together. They go on vacations together. They even had the father move in with the other family for a short period of time, and they're just lovely and amazing. But it took me months, if not years, to get them to share their story on our blog. And ultimately, you know, we had lots of media platforms that were interested, and they weren't quite ready, which is 100% understandable. But it's a challenging position to take publicly. And,
It is.
you know, yeah.
Ben had to push me a little bit.
I did. I mean, it's because, you know, when we set out to write the book, or I set out to write the book, it just, I would never have done it or gone down and written it myself without Nikki, you know, because the whole secret to our sauce is that just like our marriage, you know, it took two to ruin that relationship, and it takes two to make it.
Now
Right.
it takes 4 to make it.
Well, now it takes 4. But
it's so interesting. Like, when I was just practicing through my law firm, I saw the worst of the worst cases. I mean, the nastiest, meanest, most horrible cases. Now, having had Hello Divorce for the last couple years, it's almost the exact opposite. I never knew how many people actually have relatively decent separations and divorces. But it only takes one thing, one bad fight, one hearing where you're throwing, mudslinging, for things to really go downhill.
I have a question for you when you're done.
So it's just so important for us to keep those lines of communication open and be respectful, and sometimes hold our tongue, as hard
Right.
as awful as that is.
well, especially for this one sitting next to me,
What do you mean?
holding your tongue, biting your tongue.
Oh,
You're the talker.
no, it's him. I have a question for you though, Erin. Do you get a lot of couples that are at each other's throats still, or are most of your couples that come to you a little more level-headed?
Yeah.
Or do you still get both?
So that's a really good question. The people that are going to use Hello Divorce or are inquiring about Hello Divorce, and it's not always couples. There's usually a doer spouse, and that doer spouse is generally the one who's going to go about and handle procedurally the divorce. These are generally people that don't want a messy divorce, that they are looking for an alternative outside of court. Because remember, before COVID, the legal system was inefficient. It pit spouse against spouse. It was super expensive. It was really inconvenient. And now it's the same but worse. And so I think that the people that are looking for divorces through Hello Divorce are not interested at all in fighting. They've done enough of that. Many of them tell me that it's been 5, 6, 7 years of trying to make their relationship work before one of them said, or both of them said, it's over. So at this point, they just want to move on to their next chapter, and they want to do it as efficiently and as convenient as possible. And that goes for the same, a lot of people at our firm as well. However, as you say, it takes 2 people to really co-parent effectively. And if one person is not committed to that, things can get messy pretty quickly.
Right.
And ultimately, it's up to you to choose your battles, because there are a ton that you are going to lose, and that's okay.
Yeah,
There are
and
things that you
and
want.
that's
Yeah.
and that's so important. I mean, through the when you're dealing with romance and finance, right?
Yeah.
You know, the 2 biggest FU buttons I think we have as humans You know, it's there's some bumpy roads, and there's some bumpy roads from the minute, you know, or towards the end of the, you know, the marriage, to the divorce process, to after, to when you know, introduce new people. I mean, we're not dealing with easy things here, but as long as, you know, Nikki and I were committed, we weren't going to let lawyers, present company excluded, or you know, our families or friends, you know, take us away from what we want. Ultimately, we had to be in control of our own future, our own child, our
you
own.
set ground rules. Maybe you didn't do it. Did you do it intentionally? Because I always encourage people to do that.
Intentionally, as far as take control of.
Like you said, it sounds like you set some ground rules. You said to each other, look, we're not going to let this get crazy messy. We're going to focus on what our needs are. We're going to stay out of court to the extent possible.
Right.
Like, were those things that you guys intentionally did, or did it just happen sort of organically?
I think
I started off that way
Right.
and stayed that way. That one didn't.
Yeah. I mean, I think that when it came to the turning points, if you will, you know, those bumpy roads where, you know, one wrong thing and it could go, you know, blow up. I mean, it is a lot. I'm sure you dealt with it and been dealing with it for 15, you know, however long you've been practicing. It's a landmine, you know, and so I think what we did, intentional, or, you know, all the other stuff that had come out of it, and what I just said, what we just did was our lens that we looked through what was best for Asher, and that's our son. And so when it came time to making decisions, or it came time to whether it's custody, financial settlement, it had to
Check that box.
check that box. Not what was best for Nikki, not what was best for Ben, because that box is ego box.
It
Right.
didn't start out that way.
No, and it didn't.
You're not only dealing with your child, you're negotiating the dissolution of the most complex contract most people will ever enter into. All the finances, you've got love, finances, and kids. Like, there is nothing harder in the world. If all that you did this year was negotiate your way out of your marriage, that is so huge and major, and you got to pat yourself on the back. This is one of the hardest things you can possibly go through, and yet you learn so much about yourself. And I just realized I'm not sounding lawyerly at all.
No,
So
good. That's why we picked you to be on this, you know, on our live stream. Do you want to read that, Nick?
Which one?
I can put it up. Karina's, yeah. For some reason,
I
I
block
can't.
all us out. Lawyers, family, friends, so we could keep our focus locked down tight on our kids and what was best for them. We didn't want to let any chatter from others ignite our ego or emotions and lead us astray. The reason why he can't read that is because the print's too small.
I don't know.
I love that. I think that's so genius. I think we need to do another blog about the things that people did to try to keep their divorce or their separation as amicable as possible, because that's another one. I mean, ground rules, so important, but also check-ins. Like, there are going to be things that we disagree on, and sometimes we can't even work through those things, and we need to bring in some outside help, which, again, doesn't have to be lawyers. You can talk to a lawyer, see what the law says, understand where you might have exposure, your best or your worst case scenario. But ultimately, at least for me, I much rather have a co-parenting therapist who's trained in this kind of stuff help us make a decision than some judge who heard my case from my lawyer who argued it for 15 minutes in front of him or her.
Who doesn't know you
at all, right? Your triggers or what your kids need. It just really comes down to who has the better argument, who's willing to take it as low as it needs to go so that the court sympathizes or empathizes with your position.
Megan Price wants to know, how do you use humor? Where'd Megan's go?
To resolve conflict, especially right now.
Yeah, well, it really comes down to your personalities. So I have an interesting relationship in that my husband and I went through the entire divorce process and then remarried. And so we have this really interesting perspective. But even when we were at each other's throats and we were in the divorce process, we could laugh about really hard things. That's how we've always been. That's how we make it through life. So, I mean, it really depends on on your relationship. And I find that if you can laugh, it makes everything feel a lot softer and easier to resolve. And for some people, the humor might not work at all. And for them, their brains are more linear and they need to focus more on what the facts are. And in that case, I think that a really good thing to do would be to download our parenting plan worksheet and start working through all the different issues that could come up, not just the pandemic, but things that come up along the way.
Right.
Whether or not we agree that our child should be able to see a therapist, whether or not our child should be allowed to get a tattoo. I mean, all these things.
So it starts with the parenting work is to start from a place of where you agree and trying to find where you agree first, which I think is brilliant, instead of going at it first of what you disagree upon, because I think that's important. You know, even today, 13 years later, Nikki and I have different parenting skills. You know, we have different personalities, but those
it makes you feel good when you actually agree on something before you disagree on something.
Right, but those issues would be there whether we were married or not. And so, you know, finding that common ground. Take us through Hello Divorce and what makes the process for somebody out there who's on the verge of or going through, you know, the traditional divorce. How is it different? Besides obviously the money saving, which I'd love you to talk about, but for better outcomes.
Mm-hmm. Well, so as I said before, whether it be conscious or subconscious, the legal system pits you against each other by virtue of just like X versus Y, sometimes right in the pleadings themselves. And the way we're taught to resolve something is if you can't come to an agreement, you go to court. And as you know, when we go to court, we have to put our best case on. And that means that all the dirty laundry from our ex is likely to come out. And so I think the big difference with Hello Divorce is that court is not an option for the parties or couples that come to use our platform. Their goal, like I said, is to get out of their marriage with the least amount of damage as possible. And the difference between them and the other system is that they're not focused on their ex. They're focused on themselves and their wellness and reorganizing their families in a way that makes the most sense for them. And so it's the first piece is saving money. And when you save money, you feel less stressed. And so the forms, the procedural part of the divorce that lawyers would ordinarily do, can easily be completed by a legal document assistant or by our users by using our software, which is kind of like a TurboTax, but for divorce. You have a guided interview that you fill out, and then out pops your forms. The other way is that we understand that sometimes there are legal issues, and so we have lawyers available and mediators available if you need them, but they're not the center of your case. And so that way you're driving your case, you're being empowered, you're moving your case to the next step. And if you end up with a little conflict along the way, we can help.
That's great, though.
And so just how is it different from it's collaborative? Is it collaborative, or is it a different form of collaborative expanded, like a collaborative 2.0? I mean, do the separate parties not need each to have a lawyer?
Sometimes they each have a lawyer, sometimes they don't.
But they don't have to.
Through our platform, we can only provide legal counsel to one party.
That's what I was asking.
Yeah. So it's actually, I don't know what you call it other than Hello Divorce, because it's a model that hasn't been done before and quite frankly isn't legal in every state. And we're working hard to make it legal. But it's tricky because what we do is we leverage the technology and legal document assistants, non-lawyers, to do the vast majority of the divorce. Because quite frankly, not only are they good at forms, but they're good at communication in a way that a lot of lawyers or doctors aren't. And so I like to utilize them to handle a lot of the logistics that come up with divorce.
Well, we just put your website on the screen share, and every time we do that, it seems to mess it up.
Pull that question up.
Which one? Okay. Put that up on the broadcast, hopefully. But go ahead and read it, Nick.
I live in different states, and my son goes to his dad's house in the summer, but I'm a nurse. Can a judge let me keep him for the summer?
What's I guess it's dependent on what state, but the essence of the question is
I guess it would have to do with what's happening in the world right now. Is that what that question has?
Yeah, and I guess where judges are going to rule with when it comes to validities. I guess any judge would do that. Is their best judgment on if it's safe for the child to be around somebody who's working on the front lines. Right, because that isn't divorce. I mean, I don't know, but I'll ask you. Divorce court or family court is always going to do what's in the best interest of the kids. Make their decisions.
It's a little bit tricky, right? Because in the United States, it is generally the best interest standard, but judges have a lot of discretion, and so what one, like in Florida, might think is a good idea is not going to be the same in California. Just this week, we saw a Florida judge take custody from, I can't remember if it was a doctor or nurse.
I think it was a nurse.
A nurse.
One recently.
And the exact opposite thing is happening in California, and actually most states, to be honest. Unless if you are asymptomatic, the courts are saying that you should be able to continue having custody. Now, that doesn't mean that privately couples aren't doing something different. I have a lot of couples that have used the Hello Divorce platform where one is a doctor or a nurse, and they are by agreement having their child stay with the other parent.
Right. And I think, again, from a non-lawyer person, I think communication and speaking and seeing if, like I love the parenting plan you came up with, is seeing where you agree first and try to come up with your own dispute resolution instead of putting it in the hands of others. Instead of, you would think that judge might, from a common sense, not rule that way, but he did, she did, whatever so what, there's a MMA, the guy who runs MMA says, never put it in the hands of the judges. Right. And so, because you don't know how they're going to rule. And so you control your own destiny, and see if you can have a discussion with your ex and try to find a common ground is what I would, advise. Again, I think that's,
And generally speaking, the compromises that you're going to come to outside of court are going to be a lot more practical and easy to live through. If you lose in court, you not only lose the case, but you also lose really the ability to have a healthy relationship with your co-parent. You've got one person who now feels vindicated and another person who is devastated.
Right.
And you can't discount how much ego plays into this. So, if your co-parenting relationship is strained, now's the time to work with a co-parenting counselor or a parenting coordinator, or someone like a pastor, someone who can help guide you towards at least communicating in a way that comes to resolution.
Right.
You don't have to like them or love them. That's ideal. But at least in a way that doesn't make messes out of every little decision.
Right. And so there was, again, I'll throw this number up on the screen, but we did get, if
you want me to read that?
What if your ex doesn't want anything to do with your child except for once every 6 months to make himself feel better? It's getting harder the older the child gets. Yeah.
Can you repeat that? I'm sure everyone heard it but me.
Yeah.
I zoned out
What if your ex doesn't want anything to do with your child except for once every 6 months to make himself feel better? It's getting harder the older the child gets.
Did they say how old the child is?
No.
I don't know why I just
Yeah. So this just like taking off my legal hat for a minute. We do want to encourage, as long as the child wants to see that other parent, we want to encourage that and love on that, because one thing we do know is that kids prefer a screwed up dad than no dad at all.
Yeah, I'm testament to that.
That being said, it's such a tricky situation. The court is not going to force a parent to be more involved with their kid than they should be.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, again, all this sounds great, but again, it takes two,
right?
To make it work. Samantha
would like to know how you find a co-parenting counselor.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So most courts have a list that they provide. Unfortunately, courts aren't really open right now, so that's hard to find. We have a lot of co-parenting counselors on hellodivorce.com that have written, I wouldn't say a lot, but a few that have written articles. So you're welcome to check out our site or to message us, tell us what jurisdiction you live in, and to the extent that we know someone, I'm happy to give you a referral. I would also check out a site called Divorcify. And Divorcify is a great resource if you are divorcing, not just to find co-parenting counselors, but it's where they have lawyers who actually state what their rates are. They have certified divorce financial analysts, all sorts of professionals that work within the divorce system and can provide you with a lot of help. Also Google it. I mean, obviously I'm in Northern California, so if anyone else is and they need a co-parenting counselor, I'm a great resource for you.
Right.
She's in Florida.
She's in Florida. Okay. So in Florida, I can't think off the top of my head, but I definitely have connections there.
Yeah, and we've talked to some people too. So, Samantha, if I'm going to throw all of our social media stuff up here, pretty much easy. Our Happy Divorce at everything, and at Hello Divorce at everything.
At everything. Yeah.
So, I didn't really need to make that big fancy graphic, but
I like the big fancy graphic.
There it is. So we can help you, Samantha, find somebody, and Aaron can too. And there was one other thing I had before.
A shout out though to a lawyer that came out of Florida. She's licensed in Florida and in California, Rebecca Zung. She's also a wonderful resource because she works directly with people who are negotiating with a narcissist. And I know, like, most of us want to say that our ex is a narcissist.
Right.
they aren't always, but she
Most
has
of the time.
great resources for co-parenting, especially with someone who is really, really challenging.
Yeah. Well, we are at around the hour time, and I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I really, really enjoyed this conversation, and hopefully, this was sort of put together last minute, but hopefully if you have time, we can, extend it a little further. And we talked to some of those counselors earlier in the week, and, maybe we'll get them involved too, and just have as many.
Hold up before you're done. That question is for Erin. This is an old client of yours that lives in New Jersey. My son's dad lives in California. He also did not follow the court ruling to spend time on Christmas. I thought of taking him back to court and was thinking that this was the best time. What do you think, Erin?
Well, right now, this is not the best time to be in court at all, period. In fact, most courts are not even responding to anyone's filings unless there is an emergency. And the word emergency is being interpreted a little bit more broadly than ordinarily. So, like, as an example, if you lose your job and you want to modify support and your ex says no, then a lot of the courts are at least allowing you to file because they don't necessarily want you to have to wait to modify support. But that being said, I based on what I know, I don't think that would be considered an emergency. And so I would say to wait or to work with an online mediator if that's an option. But I don't think that, I think that we need to be really careful with courthouses that are already completely overrun. I've heard that there's banker boxes of pleadings that haven't been filed.
Banker boxes? So that'd be like just a big box of
Something
stuff.
you don't want to,
briefs.
yeah.
A lot of briefs.
Of pleadings, yeah, that just like haven't even been filed or looked at by judges. Right. So sometimes it makes sense to appoint a private judge. Sometimes it makes sense to, like in this situation, if it's always been pretty contentious, to get lawyers involved to at least try to negotiate something that works. You want to do that for a couple reasons. One is it might actually work and you'll come to a solution. The other reason, and this is kind of our what we talk about at my firm, is that if you don't come to a solution, we like to be able to tell a judge, hey, we did everything we could to be reasonable. And this guy or this gal just wouldn't even engage in settlement negotiations. And therefore, we want our results, and we also want some attorney's fees, maybe.
Yeah. Well, Erin, I appreciate it so much. And hopefully, we'll talk this week, and we'll come back next week, bigger, badder, and a little stronger. I think we did great.
We want more graphics from you.
Yeah, I can make more graphics. I can do that. I even had one just in case.
More graphics.
Wait, no, that wasn't it.
We want sound
just in
effects.
case you guys needed to take a break. Come on.
Sound effects.
You were pretty well prepared.
We
I
have
like
sound effects.
In case we needed a break.
We have all kinds of sound effects.
I love you, Daddy.
We have Izzy saying, I love you, Daddy. We have all kinds of things. Come on.
Maybe you can convince your son or
yes.
to join us for a few minutes.
We'll be back shortly. We don't want that on there. All right. Well, we appreciate it, Erin. Again, thank you so much. And thank you for everything you do. We've been an admirer of yours for a long time. And it's going to take people like you who are in the practice of law to really change the conversation. So when people get divorced, they don't automatically go, I'm going to war. So we appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I adore the two of you, and I love the example that you're setting, and especially when you're able to share some of the tools and like the journey that you've been through your book or otherwise, because it helps people more than you know.
I think the power of relatedness is one of the strongest feelings there are out there. So
I agree.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll talk soon. We're going to go a little the opening and run our little video. So thank you, Erin, very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think the fear for me personally was that, I didn't want to be a divorced dad, and I was having all this fear about the women I'd meet, and me having to say I was divorced, and what do they think when they hear about a divorced dad.
I was petrified, like to be a single mom and like get labeled the single mom when like you sort of feel like you're labeled as like damaged goods. It took a long time to get over that for me, and realize that it's not really that big of a deal.
I never thought I would date someone who had a child.
I didn't want to just be a step-parent. I wanted to be a co-parent. I wanted to be a part of Asher's life. I wanted to shower him with love and show him things that were important to me, priorities to me, things that made me the man that I am today. And I wanted to share that with him, and I wanted Ben's blessing to be able to do that.
And I kind of was wondering if a stepmom would be different from a stepdad and stuff like that. And I wanted brothers and sisters too. Kind of regret it now, but no, I'm just kidding.
People make it about themselves. It's not. It's about your kids.
I think the biggest thing about this book is putting aside your ego is a huge, if there was one thing that all of us had to do every step of the way, it was putting aside our ego and also being really considerate.
I just had to change my behaviors. I just had to change you know, who I was and who I wanted to be, and, you know, what kind of father I wanted to be, what kind of man I wanted to be.
A happy divorce is absolutely possible. Again, you just have to be committed and willing to take the necessary steps to have it. And I'll tell you, if you're willing to do it, your children will be better because of it, and your life will be better because of it.
There's a lot of people with their families, they just say that, oh, this isn't possible, my family can't do this, but just know that it's always possible and you could always have a happy divorce.